Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to, just getting comfy, welcome back to Connection Point Conversations. If you were with us last week, you will know that Thomas is in Hawaii, so he takes a few minutes to get himself set up. So oh my goodness, he's already set up, and there he is. Hi, Thomas. Please feel free to join whenever you feel like it. Here we go. Good morning, Thomas. Aloha.
Aloha, Mheyah. It is so lovely to be here. Great to see your beautiful, bright, and shiny face.
Oh, that is so sweet. I was feeling like, was I feeling bright and shiny today? I wasn't sure, but I think I do. So there we go.
Excellent. Great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank
so
you.
Today we are going to talk about trust. Now, when we end usually our weekly calls, we go over what it is is coming up for us that we would like to talk about. So Thomas made a couple suggestions. One, I went, I'm so not ready to talk about that yet. That was intuition. And then he says, well, how about trust? And I still went, it's a big, complex issue. Thomas texted me yesterday and said, I'm just going to go with simple. And I went, really? It doesn't feel simple to me. Now, we've shared quite a lot about our past. And I think for me growing up, trust was broken by the adults in my life, as well as my trust and my faith in myself to be able to look after myself in a way to get my needs met when it was being those things were being so diminished by the adults in my life. So this really is, for me, is definitely my ongoing work. And what was really interesting, there's so much to talk about, but last night I was talking to the very wise one, which is my youngest son. And I was sharing with him, we have an ongoing conversation about relationships and about things that are going on in our lives within the family and without. And he goes, Mom, you know what I'm really sensing is you're not trusting. And I went, oh my God. Of course I wasn't. And it comes up quite regularly. And he says, are you trusting the other person? I went, yes. He said, are you trusting yourself? And I went, no. And then he says, and are you trusting in the universe? And I went, Thomas, whenever I feel anxious, when what's the word? I'm really feeling compelled to solve an issue with someone or to but I've got the stress and anxiety behind it. My hidden agenda is I need to resolve it so I feel less anxious. And it's always when I'm not trusting. Now, I'm just going to go over a little something that came up for me yesterday when we were talking and I've written a few things down, is trust. There's trust or distrust with yourself, trust with yourself, and there's trust with others. And really those are kind of almost the two categories where it's personal or professional. Relationships, basically, there's that dynamic, if you don't trust others, will show up no matter where. And then there's the trust with yourself. Now, what's interesting about trust for me is that I might trust myself with one thing, but then I don't trust myself with another thing, and it's the same with others. You might trust someone to handle the money really well in the family, but you might not trust them to do any cooking. And so trust, I think, is quite complicated. When, for me, trust with myself is usually when I've had regrets. And then there's the process of working through that after it's caused me to feel distrustful of my discerning, whatever's going on. With other people, a lot of the time, the reason is because they've hurt us. They've not shown up as we expected them to. Not expected, that's the right word, but they've not shown up in a way that they've committed to. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And then there's the hurt. What happens after that is, if we don't deal with it, like we've talked so many times on our conversations, is then people disengage. So they're not trusting the other person and they disengage. However, with a client last night, it sounded like, oh, I don't trust this person. I don't trust this person. They've hurt me. And then I went, wait a minute. The underlying issue really, from what I thought, was, yes, some people are going to show up in distrustful ways. However, it came up for me that it's really, really underneath that about trusting yourself. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's what came up for me in that moment. So trust is definitely my ongoing work, to remind myself. I have some things to discuss, because we're going to talk about the process of how to learn how to trust yourself, and maybe sort of talking to that inner critic that causes that feeling of distrust. Learning, as I often say, I'm learning the art of discernment, so that helps me trust myself. So, and it is a tool. So help me out here and please tell us, share, because I know, okay, so my experience of you, Thomas, is that even in spite of your past, you've grown through that. And you exude a total trust to me in yourself, in the universe, which I think has faith and trust. Do I have faith in the world? Do I have faith in myself? Trust and faith are very, and I don't mean faith in the religious sense, but sort of in the spiritual sense. So I would love to hear what you have to say.
Mheyah, thank you for that beautiful reflection. I take a breath, and
receive.
It's one of the, yeah, thank you. It's one of the ways that I really believe I move in the world with self-trust, and it's lovely to have you affirm that for me, because of course we're back to, I'm the only one that can't see myself when I walk into a room, so thank you for being that reflection for me. That's really important. All right, again, I have a story that I move in the world with self-trust, and yet it's lovely to hear from you that I do. I wanted to also affirm back to you talked about it, something coming up for you. And it's the epitome of self-trust when we can trust that thing that's coming up for us is our truth.
Yes.
So I want to acknowledge that you could land on noticing. First of all, it's about noticing, this is coming up for me. And where in our bodies does it land? Is this something that is more egotistically driven, or is this something that is more divinely or heart driven? And ultimately, we get to land on whether or not we trust that. I went back to, and I started with this notion of what is self-trust. And for me, the definition of self-trust is the firm reliance, Mheyah, on the integrity of me, the firm reliance on the integrity of ourselves. And of course, I know that there's a difference between a life that wasn't grounded for me in self-trust and one today that is. You get to see the difference between the two, right?
Yes.
When I look at examples of myself, now that I'm self-trusting, I notice that I have clarity, I have confidence in the choices I make. I notice that I can breathe into an interdependence with other people, particularly my intimate relationship with my husband. And of course, that also includes healthy dependency, right? We walk the line between interdependence, dependency, and at times not being hyper independent, because of course it's a we, and I'm way more powerful as a we than I am an I. And of course, I then get to notice that I speak with some authority from a deep place of discernment, and yet it isn't arrogance. It isn't arrogance.
Oh, I love what you're saying. Oh my goodness.
Thank
That explains it really well. Thomas, I just have to tell everybody, this line that you said, I'm sorry, is just standing out so beautifully. You said, it's a reliance on being able to live in my integrity. And I think that that is huge. If you
Yes.
trust yourself to always know that you're going to live in integrity with yourself, then that's where a lot of trust comes from. Oh, that was the best way I've ever heard it described.
Oh, thank you. And of course, the qualifier was a firm reliance, right? A firm reliance.
Yes.
And then the gift of all of this, Mheyah, in my lifetime has been becoming a good observer and having cultivated the ability to learn from all of the experiences that have come to me in this lifetime, because they happen for me and not to me.
Yes.
And they are both, my judgment of, they are both the successes and ultimately the failures, because I think self-trust is really the unsung hero in my pursuit of growth. It's the unsung hero in the pursuit of growth. And of course, a lot of our focus has a tendency to be on the mountain that we want to climb. And of course, that mountain typically is in the distance, whether that's becoming more confident, achieving the intentions that are important for us, or making some big change in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're locked on to these in our heart and in our mind, we may not remember what's closer to home. And ultimately, what's closer to home and what's integral to how it is that I move from that place is self-trust.
Oh, wow. You just have such an incredibly eloquent way of being able to explain what feeling and doing trust, like feeling trust and knowing trust and believing in trust is. And I just really want to say, that I hope that our listeners can really hear what you're saying, because it's just so important. You said, for all of us, it's a learning, but you also said that it's about your failures as well as your successes.
Oh, yes.
And that's where I think when I commented on regret, it's a huge learning thing. Feeling guilt, whatever it is, that those are all like barometers, they're learnings, and I use them for tools when I feel those things. I think what happens with regret, and when you feel that, it stops you from being able to be present in relationships with other people and with yourself. What I believe is important then is to process the regret.
Yes.
To get back to that place of integrity with oneself, because
Indeed.
the regret could be that you were out of integrity with yourself in some way. What I loved, I looked up an article actually, because I love psychology and all that kind of stuff, and I'm always doing more science and research.
We love science.
Yes, we do. And there's a science behind all of this stuff, which is,
Is.
Interpersonal neurobiology.
Indeed.
So I think with regret, when you feel that and you lose that trust for yourself, it's really important to have a cognitive process. And some of the questions they posed in this great article was, what is your inner critic saying to yourself? Because again, that goes to the stories that we tell ourselves. What is it we're saying about ourselves? If we're having regret, does it mean that we're being hard on ourselves? Where does it come from, that voice? Now, I have a committee in my head. I don't know about you, but there's my voice. There's my mother's voice. There's my ex-husband's voice. There's all my children's voices. There's lots of voices. So it's like, okay, so where is that story? I'm going to call it a story, coming from when I'm being critical of myself. What is its intention? Now, that was an interesting question to me. It was like, oh, so what is it that's for me? What is my critical voice intention? I like that. What does it want from us? What is it that that we're needing? Is there something we need to do? What is it wanting from us to look at, to express? So it's kind of, so what is it wanting? What is its agenda? What is its job? Because usually it's all about learning about ourselves. Always goes back to that moment, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Yeah. So, and then it's like, how do we, once we've explored all that, how do we get back to that place of integrity of what it is that, where the regret is coming from, which is hindering our ability to trust ourselves? And I mean, there's loads of different processes in that. And of course, and then there's trusting yourself in relationship, which, as I said before, is very complicated, because once you've lost trust with someone else or with yourself, it is hard to build it up again.
Yes, it is.
So, and I love, team leaders and businesses are always saying how to build, trust in a team and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, whoa, that's a whole other subject.
That is a whole other subject. And oftentimes when that's trumpeted, what's not encouraged is this notion of that leader saying, trust me. And ultimately what I realized for myself is, as I attempted to do trust without a foundation of actually knowing what the energy of trust was, and then gifting myself with being the energy of trust, I realized that when I didn't trust myself, right, I didn't respect my opinion. I didn't respect my true desire of how it is that I expected myself to learn, to develop, and to grow.
Yes.
So it wasn't me tagging on to somebody because I really wanted to abdicate my responsibility of trusting myself and give it to somebody else.
Ah.
Oh, absolutely. It was classic victim, meaning that if I leaned on you,
Mm-hmm.
right, to trust, and you didn't, then it was my life was your fault.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of course, what I wasn't able to do, I wasn't able to lean into being 100% responsible for my life. So of course I couldn't trust myself. So my point in all of this is, oftentimes in our humanity, right, I'm a far better human being than I am a human doing. As I began to do trust, there was a disconnect for me because I didn't give myself an opportunity to really understand what the energy of trust was. And when I became the energy of self-trust, it was an invocation for me to then take a breath and realize that, wow, there's a huge difference between doing trust and being trust. And from a place of being the energy of trust, I find myself way more confident. I found it way easier to believe myself, particularly like you had said, the thoughts that are swirling in my mind. Developing self-trust for me is really about building a better relationship with me.
Absolutely, 100%. And I just love that. A long time ago, I didn't realize that I didn't trust myself. And I went to this program, I think I might have mentioned it before, called Choices.
Yes.
And it runs in Texas, Calgary, and Vancouver. But I did it when I was living in Texas. Anyway, the processes that you do at some point within the 4 days, you have a goal for your life. You have a vision. You've expressed what it is that you want your life to look like, how you want to be in this world. What it does, the next part of the process is, what do you need to change about yourself? What do you need to do to have what you want, which is the being part of it. And for me, when I did my mission statement, it was that I am a trusting woman. I actually still need to remind myself of that almost on a daily basis.
That you are a trusting woman.
That I am a trusting woman. Where am I not going to, where am I not showing up trusting? Like what my son said yesterday was just so intuitive and such a gift that he could mirror that back to me. And I wonder where he learned that from.
Well, and also what came up to me was the biblical expression, right? From the mouths of babes.
Exactly. My 27-year-old babe.
Your 27-year-old baby,
This is true. But honestly, he pinpointed so clearly that the situation was the way it was because I was not trusting. Oh my God, it was a brilliant moment. I sort of went, oh wow. And he seems to do that every week, whatever our subject is. He doesn't know what our subject's going to be. He hits the nail on the head. I don't know why that is. Anyway.
Isn't that such a lovely gift? Such a lovely gift.
It is. But I wish I had more of a sense with it like you do, in just terms of it's a sensing, it's a knowing, it's just there, you be it rather than do it. And I'd like to get to that place for sure. It's easy when I work with clients to work on trust and their stuff, but it's harder for me to work on it with myself because it's so unconscious. And it's about being responsible. It's about having integrity. So
it is.
Yeah, and it's something I really value, being responsible. But trust is that one thing that's a little bit, I have to really bring it up and go, whoa, wait a minute.
It's important for me to acknowledge to myself as I kind of work through how it is I would be with this conversation you and I are having, and of course with the folks that have shown up to listen and to watch, was this remembering. I witnessed a lot of distrust in
Mm-hmm.
relationship, right? Mom and dad had a relationship more of hate than love for 33 years. I
Mm-hmm.
witnessed, right? The little boy witnessed all of this distrust. I might hear a comment from my mother, and it was opposite than I'd hear from my father. So it was this idea of eventually getting to a point where, and where this wisdom came from, Mheyah, I have no idea. I have a number of folks in my life from a therapeutic perspective that have the theory around where it came from. And the most prominent was this notion of somebody quite, in the Hawaiian culture, our elders are called kupuna, somebody quite older in my life. And eventually a person that I went to do a reading for me said, Thomas, there has been a much older woman in your life, and she's been responsible for caring. She's prayed for you your entire life. And I remember saying to him, I needed to land on an energy for myself, even as a little boy, and I didn't understand what it meant. And this was different than kind of my understanding from a Catholic perspective because I was raised that way. But I could lean on this notion of there was some energy that felt it kind of drew me in and helped me to kind of make my way through this wackiness of my family. And being able to land on this idea of trust and begin to trust myself. And of course, all the while that I didn't, probably more as an adult because it was a better intellectual understanding of trust and self-trust, it was beginning to show myself compassion, being able to listen to myself and give myself the space I needed just to be able to observe whether it is I was trusting or not trusting, right? Because when I didn't treat myself in a particularly kind way, every time, Mheyah, it meant that my self-trust was off, right? And
Exactly.
ultimately, you know, the question that came up for me was, as I watched my family, would I trust somebody who constantly was distrusting in their own relationships?
Exactly.
And of course, when you're witnessing your parents, it was really difficult, right, for me as a little boy to say, no, I wouldn't trust that. And it
Yeah,
meant
I
that
can.
I would need to create a circle for myself around, because of course I said initially, I want you to be the leader that I can trust, right? And when my life isn't working out, I got somebody to blame. So that was my circumstance with my parents. And then eventually you get to the point where you realize that
Mm-hmm.
I'm 100% responsible for my life, right? Before I would storm ahead towards that mountain I wanted to climb, I wanted to ensure that myself my self-trust was intact. And that differentiated this notion of doing trust, because I watched trust being done and it never worked. So my thought was, what if
Yeah.
I became the energy? Would that help this journey that I was on in relation to how it is that I could actually move myself to a point where I really trusted me? And it's not that I don't trust other people, but the equation is quite simple. The more self-trust grows in me, well, two things happen. It's much easier for me to recognize whether it exists in that person in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and then my ability to trust other people is also enhanced.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Oh, thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that. That's really
you're welcome.
powerful. Yeah.
You're welcome.
It's interesting because what I'm noticing too is that when I look back on my family patterns and growth, it's interesting. My self-trust was severely damaged in similar ways to yours, but also because I intuitively trusted, I intuitively knew, and I had integrity with myself even when I was a little girl. And I would sit there, sometimes I would even talk about it and say, well, that doesn't seem accurate to me, or that's not right, or I need this, or I want that. And then the other person would gaslight. No, that's not true.
Oh,
No, that's not what's happening here. You're mixed up. Oh, you're just being too sensitive. And then, so I didn't have just an inner critic. I had outer critics. And that's when I stopped trusting myself. I'm thinking, well, okay, these are the grown-ups here, so they should know. And and then that continued for me. It continued for me into my first marriage and in my second marriage, where gaslighting was the way it went. And I really didn't trust myself at all. Not until for the last 10 years, that's been my process of learning to trust myself and go, wait a minute, none of that was true. And I think that when other people do that to us, it can be exceedingly damaging in a young person to have to learn to get past that.
True.
And that is a lot of the journey of people who are children of alcoholics, who live in abusive families, is that real sense of what you know when you're a child, mouths of babes. Like you kind of have this sense of knowing and honesty and integrity with yourself. And I had that. I remember having it. But the moment that was expressed in any way, somebody else would feel that I was sharing that they were being dishonest or that wasn't true or whatever was going on for them, then they would do the gaslighting. And I think that that's been a pattern for me that's caused me not to trust myself.
That makes sense, Mheyah. And the gift of trusting yourself for you would be what? What's life today for Mheyah coming from a place of self-trust?
I would think I would probably encompass some of what I see you expressing, which is a calmness, a knowing, it would be less stressful. I would not have to be always doing that self-talk. And I think that's still part of the process.
Of course.
For a lot of people, especially with clients that I work with as well, as well as myself, I'm, in that same boat, that I would just automatically start to feel that same thing I felt when I was a little girl, which was that I just knew. And that I could trust that. My intuition, my faith in myself, that being honest and authentic is just, to me, the best way to live with your heart.
Wow. So when you gift yourself with self-trust, calm, a lack of stress, so less fear, right?
Oh, absolutely. Less fear.
Peace. Yes. Isn't it tremendous, huh? And
yeah. That's the gift.
It is a gift. And of course, I've got some suggestions that might help some folks learn how to build self-trust. And the first one, Mheyah, that you've landed on is give yourself space to feel your feelings, right? When different feelings or emotions come up, it can be so easy to avoid them. Or remembering the voices of the past that said to little Mheyah, no, that feeling's not correct. You're having it. There's a part of you that knows it is, and you're being pushed off of it because that dysfunctional adult doesn't want to feel their feelings, right? Often we use our preferred numbing tool, right, to keep those feelings away, right? Today, a numbing tool might be the scrolling of social media, right? When we do this, we're not giving ourselves this space and the time needed to begin to even acknowledge the presence of a feeling, let alone begin to process them and be able to move on, right? This can undermine our self-trust because we're not listening to ourselves, right? And my experience, Mheyah, with you is that you are really extraordinary because when we landed on talking about this, I know the discomfort came up for you, and yet you listened to something, and then ultimately, right, one of the people in your life that can reflect back to you had a question for you around, are you trusting? Right? Finding a way to give yourself the space which you did to feel your feelings, right? And that is either through being quiet, breathing, meditating, journaling, but it's an opportunity for you to allow whatever that is that's running through you just to land, to give yourself the gift of time to figure out what you truly want, what you really need to listen to. And ultimately, you bring yourself back to, and I love that one of the biggest gifts for you is a sense of calmness. You chose self-trust, right, as a sense of calmness. And I want to acknowledge the journey, and I want to acknowledge that in 10 years, that's been a focus for you. But also let me, if I can, plunk in the space. My experience is that you do it well, right? And then there are moments where it's really challenging to grab onto this notion of self-trust.
Yeah.
And there we have, I mean, that's what's challenging in our humanity, right? One day we have it, the next day we don't have it.
I know. And that's the challenge. However, with some, I think I shared earlier on with moving into the house, with family, even though we're separate, it's been interesting that self-trust has become my biggest work in terms of that when other people, I don't know why my phone keeps turning off. Anyway, what happens for me is that I feel I don't listen to my feelings,
Okay.
and then I go to shame. So what I loved what you just said is that, again, feelings are your barometer. Feelings are your barometer, and it's important to listen to them. When I do that, and I really have a healthy understanding of and an awareness of what I need, what's going on, the dynamics of the whole thing, I can really trust myself then to be able to share that with other people from a really good place, rather than the place of where I'm functioning in terms of shame about my feelings, and I can get confused quite easily by other people, again, doing the gaslighting.
Yes, of
So,
course.
and I go, oh, whoa, so I have to settle in. And I think it's probably very similar for a lot of people. I think that hopefully sharing your journey towards trust and the process that I've gone through, that it'll help other people really learn how to do that. I just want
I
to
would agree.
acknowledge that I see a friend of mine that's just joined us, and I saw my stepdaughter join us, and I'm really glad. If anybody's it's so nice to see you here. If there's anything you feel that you'd like to add, please put a little message in there for us if you have any questions about this. Anyway, Thomas, and I also really appreciate you reflect back so beautifully what someone's experience is. I can imagine that working with you as a client is such a gift.
Thank you.
Can I be a client? No, I'm kidding. I think we do it automatically. But I do, you and I, but I do love the fact that you reflect back and I go, well, yeah, I'm still working on this stuff. And it's important to be honest about that. And okay, my family relationships all sort of bring up that little childhood wounded part that I still sort of occasionally shows, like a broken arm. Oh yeah, that bone hurts today. It's raining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge your courage in being able to just be present to that coming up. Be present to that. The second thing, Mheyah, I wanted to add, because you've already talked about it, is this notion of creating a positive relationship with your inner critic. And of course, like you, from time to time, I can have a really rocky relationship with this inner critic, which typically sometimes, well, most times, especially when its intent is to actually have me feel really shitty about myself, right? We either take everything it says to heart and follow its direction without argument, or we distract ourselves, push down its words and avoid it, right? But part of building self-trust is understanding that as nasty as our inner critic can be, there can also be a positive intention behind its actions. It's actually it's inviting us to some level of safety, right? When we're able to see and recognize it and for me, my inner critic, when I can source which part, because I have two. I have the divine in me that can be an inner critic, which is way more loving than the egotistical part of me. When I can recognize that this sacred entity that it is really inviting me to foster a relationship with it. So I've done that work. I begin then to say thank you, right? When I can appreciate its positive intentions. And then I can listen to, and this sounds funny when I say it this way, but I can listen to the fact that I'm not listening, right? Because when I do listen to this inner critic, because of course it will be with me until I take my last breath, it can lead me, right?
Yes.
Down, it can lead me in a couple of ways. Positive self-talk, right? So my inner critic can be my cheerleader. It can encourage me. It can actually have me also begin to speak kindly to other folks when I allow myself to speak kindly to me. It really helps me trust myself because it reminds me that it's my partner in this journey. It would be called from time to time discernment, right? The divine part of me, that intuitive part of me that you reference. So I'm right there with you. It's really creating a relationship that's affirming for us with our inner critic.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, again, it kind of goes to the dark and the light. You've got your inner
Absolutely.
critic. Yes. And that it's important to embrace all of that in terms of our own learning and how we express ourselves in the world. What I'm just noticing too is that I see that this love and fear are opposites, trust and distrust. The word trust comes from the word true, and the word truth
Yes, it does.
That's the root word of trust. True and
True.
truth.
Truth. Wow.
And and so it shows up for people, I think, on a daily basis in every action, whether it's something at home with another person, whether it's professionally, whether you come from that loving, trusting place automatically, or whether you come from the fear and lack and ego. So I think that how we show up in the world actually tells us, is a mirror to us, am I showing up trusting? Like with Spencer saying to me that I wasn't trusting and I hadn't noticed that.
Yes, of
And
course.
and so I really hear what you're saying in terms of the what it takes to learn how to trust yourself and to listen to that inner critic. Because if you've got that little voice in your head, it's there for a reason. I love that. And anybody can use that. You could even put, you can even just go, wow, in this situation, there's something, your head's telling you, I'm not trusting here. What's going on?
Yeah.
Love, fear, honesty, integrity, truth, fear, ego, and wounds and pain on this one side.
And I'd add to that, Mheyah, this notion of also pointing to your heart.
Yes.
Right? There is an energy, there's a voice, my experience, right? And for most of my life, I didn't listen to it. Mm-hmm. I was challenged to connect the intellect and the ego, and of course, I call it the 18-inch journey, right, from my head to my heart. The other gift, right, the other thing that I landed on, this notion of some points to help people support themselves in self-trust, is making self-care a priority, right? Every time we carry out an act of self-care, we're actually affirming to ourselves that we actually are worthy, we're deserving of this, we're worthy to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And of course, this nurturing relationship with ourselves, it's one of the ways that we allow self-trust to thrive.
Yes.
Making self-care, if it's not already, but making self-care a priority, noting down the activities or writing in times where we need to self-care is really important. Scheduling in self-care for ourselves is a great way to build up self-trust, right?
I love that.
It's actually really simple. I thought about it yesterday. I thought, in my phone, right, I open my day with a reminder that I am profoundly well. And then I have a reminder to breathe. Mm-hmm. Then I have a reminder to be gentle with yourself. And then, I have a reminder that says, Thomas, today, when was the last time you listened to the whisper of your heart? I treat those little appointments, I have more of them, because they help me remember that self-care helps me maintain the energy of self-trust. And that way, I can then support my husband in him supporting himself in self-trust. So it's really self-full.
Yes,
but it's a quirky little way for me to remember in my humanity that from time to time I can take a right-hand turn and begin to lean on you, right, for trust, or other people for trust, and then realize, why do I feel really shit today? And it is that I'm not trusting myself.
Yeah, I love that. That's really brilliant. I hope everybody can understand how important that is.
Yeah, self-care.
Do you remember when you asked me a few minutes ago, you said, what would my life be like if I lived in being trusting?
Being trusting, being self-trust.
Yeah, being self-trust. I missed out something.
Oh, share.
Confidence. There's something about confidence that if I'm not trusting, I don't feel confident. I feel I call it, I'm having a wobble. And I think that if living in that place, being self-trusting, definitely would help me feel more confident with and in integrity with myself. When I'm in integrity with myself and I can get what I need, I can live with my values and my principles, I can feel more confident.
And Mheyah, what I'm just astounded by, both in its simplicity and the complexity of this, is that then you, because you're not looking for it anywhere else but inside, You're the one that gets to gift yourself with all of that. And when we gift ourselves with what it is that we need and we source it from the inside, would it be true, Mheyah, that you've allowed yourselves to stop looking for trust outside of you?
Absolutely. That is the key point that I started with at the beginning, that
Yes.
we can always go on about not trusting someone else. However, it always boils down to this part of trusting yourself. And I think that is a really important distinction. I know a lot of people who don't have that trust in themselves, and it shows up all the time. And
it does. And the other thing I was going to mention, because this is really important, it would be kind of my fourth point in building self-trust. It would be this idea of, be so clear about your choice of who it is that you want to advise yourself, right? Choose your advice, those advisors in your life, really carefully, because listening to yourself sounds easy, but in truth, it actually can be hard, right? So other people's opinions can quickly drown out our inner voice. I know for me, for the longest time, I leaned on the outer world to have me feel good about me, and it just left me more confused. So where possible, really spend time alone, getting clear about what the challenge is for you. And then if that clarity doesn't come, consider what you want and you need, and then get a sense is if there's somebody outside of you that might give an opinion, choose that source really carefully, right? I always ask, whose opinion do I really trust? Interesting, huh? And I think that's the magic of the work that you do,
this is a
right,
good
in
point.
your practice. Yeah, it's the magic of what I do in my practice, but ultimately what you and I do really well is that we don't inundate people with our opinion, our advice. Instead, we encourage the folks we work with to actually listen to themselves. We ask extraordinary questions, right? We invite a reflection and critical thinking. And our aim, Mheyah, is to guide folks to an answer that we know, and they might not know it, that already exists within inside of them. So this idea of being really clear, and of course, I'm going to do this with a lot of humility, but I think we are two people that would be really good in supporting people when they get to a place of not being able to trust themselves. So my invitation is reach out and allow us, please, to help you, because that's what we do really, really well. With great humility, I say that. With great humility, I say that. But it came up for me, and I thought, do I say this? And then I sat back and thought, how do you need to trust yourself, Thomas, in terms of how you can deliver it, huh? And of course, it's with humility. And through my humanity, I'm realizing, wow, Mheyah has this great strength. And of course, I get to see it reflected in me because it's how I see it in you. And it's one of the ways that we really can help folks really reflect and become critical thinkers about allowing them to get to the place where they have their answers, because you and I don't, right?
No, and that's the whole point of being a counselor, a coach, or anything like that, is that any mentor, is that we know that everybody has the answers within. And what's coming up when you're saying that to me is that trusting yourself also really comes down to, as you say, clarity, and being curious and getting clarity about where you're being dishonest to yourself or others, where you're out of integrity with yourself or others. When you can get clear on, I just said I was going to go and do something that I realize in retrospect I didn't want to do. Can I really trust myself to be authentically honest with others, rather than being guided by them, right?
This big smile, well, this big smile, this intuitive, right? Because it's with you, right? The fifth point I have is this. This is gorgeous because I just love how in sync we can be. Notice how it feels, right, when you don't trust yourself, right? Do you remember the last time you made what turned out to be a decision that didn't support you? Perhaps your gut, perhaps your head was trying to tell you that there's something that you're ignoring, right?
Exactly.
Take yourself back to a moment and try to remember, how did it feel when I trusted myself? How did it feel when I didn't trust myself? Because the body never lies, right?
Exactly. So
the idea here is to recognize, the idea here is to recognize, and you were just talking about it, to recognize when you're not trusting yourself, so you can identify the feeling connected to it when it comes up again in the future, right? For me, my body, right, is so brilliant, right? I begin to feel it in my stomach. So it creates fear, right? So the emotion of fear is there for me. And I've now used it as my barometer, my lighthouse. So when I feel that same sensation, I'll be able to take a moment to pause, energetically step back, and then listen. So learning to listen to the wisdom of the body is vital because, of course, like I said before, the body always wins. So I love it that you lead it into kind of the fifth point that I had, and it was listen, listen, listen to this gorgeous body of ours.
I know, and I think a lot of people stay up here. It goes back to busyness, to all sorts of stuff. You stay in your head, and you're missing those cues. And the cues, as Thomas says, I sometimes feel it very much in my heart, in the middle of my chest,
Yes.
because it's like it's like I'm hurting myself by not being honest. And then, of course, there's the one that's lower down, where is the fear. Now, what I love about what Spencer said last night to me was his next question after where was I not trusting was, what are you afraid of when I'm not trusting? So I love that, looking at your fear, recognizing the fear that's in your tummy, that's where it shows up, right? You said?
For me, yes, absolutely.
So what is it that you're afraid of? And I think that that's a pretty important thing to get really clear on as well. Because again, fear and love. So if you're feeling the fear, you're not living in trust and love.
It's really true. And taking time to allow your body to recognize, acknowledge the feeling. And I gift myself with some time, Mheyah, because long ago, when the technique of just being able to identify a feeling for me, because that was really challenging, I would quickly go, right? So the feeling would come up and I quickly intellectually go to, okay, it's got to be about something. And I realized I didn't get an answer to that because I didn't allow the feeling to actually settle and sit with me. This idea of allowing that feeling to be with me for a period of time, trusting at some point in time it's going to pass. I didn't allow it to pass. And now when I do allow it to pass, and sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes it takes 55 minutes. And when it does, then I begin to do my work around with curiosity. I begin to do my work around, or I need support to do my work around. So I wonder what that was about for me, right? I wondered what that was about for me.
Right.
And then I begin to be able to connect the dots for myself. But it's honoring the feeling first and foremost, allowing it to be there for a period of time. It will pass, and when it does, then I can become curious, or I can reach out for some help with my coach or my therapist to be able to say, here's what came up for me, here's how I felt. And John will always say to me, my therapist will always say, hang on a second, Thomas, let's stay in the feeling.
Exactly, because that's where the information is.
That's exactly
let it inform you.
Yeah, thank you. And you use the analogy, right, of the iceberg.
Yes.
Yeah, iceberg. Because when I say anger, exactly, I know where you're going to go. It's, okay, what's underneath that? It's like, oh.
I know. And I think just trusting yourself, I think, comes when I'm working with clients, ends up after the good questions and letting it feel the feelings, which is very hard for a lot of clients to be with. True. And that's why they come to counseling. I know that's why I go to counseling.
Indeed.
Is being with those feelings, is that distrusting yourself comes when you've felt vulnerable. And when you felt vulnerable and the world hasn't happened the way you were hoping it would or your intention was, and you've been vulnerable and you've hurt yourself. You've let that happen. That's a hard thing to admit, that I've let that happen to myself. And that
it's really true, huh?
Learning to be with that and then be responsible. Yeah, being responsible rather than the victim, having self-compassion, and then change alters everything. But as you say, initially the first place to be is, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Where am I out of integrity? Where am I not being honest? Yeah, where have I let myself down? Oh, and I sometimes use the word, what were you compromising in that moment? Because the person can kind of go, whoa, wait a minute. You can show up being more responsible for yourself. And that comes a lot, compassion, big, for yourself and others.
Indeed. Again, you are
Yeah.
you're leaning into kind of the sixth point for me, and this was a tough one for me to notice in my own life. It's this notion of look at and perhaps let go of the habits and routines. I mean, you and I are both really powerful advocates of structure, but sometimes, right, a habit or routine can undermine self-trust, right? I'm a big fan of habit, routine. They fall into what I call
Can you
structure,
explain that a little bit
but
more?
it's, yeah, I sure can. This notion of, I think the vitality of what supports me and the vision I hold for my life are habits and routines or rituals. But sometimes
Hmm.
some of these habits undermine the self-trust I have for myself, right? I discovered, so I looked yesterday and thought, so where might be something that I'm up to that is undermining how it is that I trust myself? And for me, the trust is this inner knowing, and it's really divinely inspired. It isn't intellectual or egotistical. So it's this notion of trust. But then I thought, oh, I have a practice, Mheyah, and it's a to-do list. It's an everyday to-do list. It's a structure that can support me. But I noticed yesterday, while the list was being helpful, what I was really doing was putting down things that actually didn't really need to be on the list. And for those things that were on the list, and for instance, one was this idea of, and it questioned the energy I would bring into my relationship with my husband. And that exists really well for me. But by listing, and it was a question of, today, did you tell Adam that you loved him? And by adding that onto that list, Mheyah, what it did for me was it began to reflect on this idea of, and perhaps there was a moment or a day where I didn't. So the egotistical question was, maybe you don't love him, or maybe he thinks you don't love him. So that overwritten to-do list on things that clearly are alive, because I'm being the energy of love with my husband, I got to notice was that began to undermine how it is that I trusted myself and my level of love, right? I knew that it was something that was important for me to do, but it wasn't something I needed to add on the list, because when I was doing it, it allowed me to actually not trust, right, that really beautiful energy of love that exists between Adam and I. And it was really quite fleeting. And when I looked at it, I thought to myself, I'm going to make a choice to stop adding that to my list, because it's alive and well. Because I noticed as I was adding it, I checked in, right? I closed my eyes, I took a breath. And when I looked at that, I could feel, right? I could feel that sensation in my tummy. I
Hmm.
could acknowledge that it was fear, right? And that habit allowed me to undermine my self-trust in the level of love, actually, that was present in my relationship with my husband. I never
That's
worked
beautiful.
this idea of self-trust today, inspired. And of course, I took a breath and thought, again, there's the humility of, because I have a story that this is the stuff that I actually should know. So I'm shooting all over myself. And I took a breath and thought, because of your agreement to actually lean into self-trust today, I got to discover in a habit for me and a routine how it was I was creating, not
Hmm.
trusting myself. So thank
Hmm.
you for the gift, because the more I can see when I am and when I'm not, the more confident, to your point, I
Yes.
get to kind of share the opinion I have for myself, and ultimately it helps me move forward towards any intention that I have, right? Because when I get
Yeah.
tripped up being overly distracted by that list, it's when the questions pop in.
I
Do
love
you
that.
do you do you really love him? Oh boy.
Well, it's interesting because what's coming up for me as you're describing all of that too is that it's the war of our duality. It's the yes and it's something that's very present in a lot of people's lives and not in others, because they just have this innate self-trust that they just they just are that. But I think that it's natural for humanity for most human beings to have this duality and two sides of ourselves that we literally have to be clear about and choose. We talked about choice. Choose, which aspect, which way of being do we choose to be and to get what we want, because we know that there's a lot of positives in living from a more trusting with ourselves. So,
Very true. And and
and
and
of
and for
course,
me, Mheyah, go ahead.
no, that's okay. Carry on.
When I get tripped up, right, when I'm
Mm,
overly distracted by questions, right? that I don't know the answers to, when I look at a list and think, wow, could that be contributing to, could that be undermining my self-trust? And because of how well, when I examine the evidence, because of how well I do trust myself, and I thought of this yesterday, I thought this is so quirky and very Thomas-like. How do I get back to my center of self-trust? Because I don't first look to outsource, right? I don't go to somebody else to say, help. And not that I won't do that in the future, but usually what I do is I insource. I go inside.
Absolutely.
And I
That's
look
such a
for.
key point. Yes,
It's a
I
key
love
point,
it.
yeah. I insource.
That's a
I
key
don't
point.
outsource.
Exactly, but that takes a lot of time to learn, I think. I think that when you're younger, depending on, who you are or how you've been brought up or socialized or our culture, you do outsource looking for that trust and just for somebody else to give that to us. And we do that a lot in relationship. And I love what you say. It's insourcing, not outsourcing. I just love that. I think that's perfect. Now I'm noticing that we've got 3 minutes left. And
Great.
I think that, again, most of our conversations all come back to learning to be conscious and aware of ourselves and learn more about ourselves. Every aspect of life, I think, brings that up for us. And I just want to say that that is really the gift that I get from other people. It's mirroring to me, so I can learn and grow and be more aware and conscious. And that's what I get from my therapist, and as well as, what you were saying. So I just hope that today, sharing, our journeys personally and professionally in terms of working with people, as well as our own journeys about trust, can help people really kind of identify and go, okay, wait a minute, how is my life not working that way? Is it because I'm not trusting? How could it work better? What could I do differently? Who do I need to be to live from that? I really trust myself. It gives you confidence.
Yes.
You can be calmer, all of those things. And so it builds way better relationships, because you might not trust another person, but as long as you trust yourself, then you can actually discern and choose whether that's the right person to be in relationship with. So it really comes back to the other person. That's outsourcing it. If you insource your level of trust, then everything else is going to be better. That's just my last word on that.
Yeah. That's a great last word. And it is self-trust is the firm reliance on the integrity of you, the integrity of yourself.
Oh,
I kind of come back to the top of our
went.
circle, right?
I know. Thank you so much. And we better
You're
say
welcome.
goodbye or we're going to lose our video. But thank you all for joining us. And I hope you'll contact us if you feel like you want to chat. Anyway, Thomas, lovely to see you. Aloha. I'll talk to you soon.
Lovely to see you. Aloha. Okay, bye for now.